Hey, welcome back. Oh man, do I have a show for you today? You're going to love this. Check this out. A friend of mine brought me to Yonkers, New York, to a pub. It was an Irish luncheon. Amazing. Not only was the food great, the entertainment was great, and the speaker was wonderful. So wonderful, I brought him here today. Today, you're going to meet the newscaster for 12 News. My name's Vin Dacquino. His name is Pat O'Keefe. Pat, what a pleasure to have you here.
Vin, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
it's great to see you.
This show is about people and their passion. Man, you have passion coming out of your passion. Talk to me a little bit about who you are. How did you get where you are? And was this like a lifelong goal?
It's all I ever wanted to do was broadcast sports, and I've had the opportunity to do that for a long time now. You know, my two passions, and I talked about both of them when I met you, were growing up in an Irish Catholic family in New York City, and sports. And I've been able to use my foundation of the first and turn it into really what's been a wonderful career in the second, in broadcasting sports for News 12 The Bronx and the New York Knicks and the NBA and
New York,
all sorts of other places right here in my hometown. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a good feeling. You know, I watched you at that luncheon, and I watched you with all of these guys. I mean, some of these guys were like in their 80s and 90s. I mean, it's amazing. And again, the passion was all over the room. And when you talk to them about sports and New York sports, talk to me a little bit about the kid, Pat, who grew up in New York City. What was that like?
Yeah, Yonkers, New York, so just
Yonkers,
outside the city. But my father's family, my grandparents were from the Woodlawn section of the Bronx.
Oh, there you go.
A lot of Irish immigrants, and my parents immigrated from County Kerry, Ireland. So I kind of had two homes growing up, Yonkers, New York, and the foundation for my entire family, which was in the northern part of the Bronx. And I grew up a huge fan of any sport you could imagine. As a young kid, I was a pretty good athlete. I played pretty much every sport, baseball, soccer, swimming, basketball, track, Gaelic football, which you might not know a lot about, but it's a very interesting sport.
You know what? You talked about that there. Talk to me a little bit about Gaelic football.
So it's a combination of, American football, soccer, and Australian rules football. Three sports that I think more people are familiar with.
And there were actual teams.
Oh yeah, there's a in the huge Irish community in the Bronx that has kind of spread outwards from New York City. There's a huge group of people that play this sport. They travel to Ireland, they travel to England, they travel all over the country, all over the world to play this.
It's tackle, it's a little brutal, right?
It's not straight on tackle. The way I was taught, and I was one of the bigger kids, and I was one of the more physical guys out there, anything goes when you could, as long as you hit somebody with your shoulder, anything goes. Now, unfortunately, a funny story about that, a kid I grew up with, I was playing against him one game, and he was quite a few inches shorter than me. So he had the ball. I wanted to take the ball away from him, and I went in with my shoulder and dislodged the ball from him. Unfortunately, I also broke his nose in the process. I felt really bad about it until he threw a can of soda at my dad's car when we were leaving the field that day. I didn't feel that bad after that.
So there's a little rough.
It's rough.
It can get rough.
It's rough.
So you grew up actually playing sports.
Yeah.
Were there sportscasters that you were like, yes?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you grew up in New York City and you're interested in it, then this area has the best of the best sportscasters.
You're right.
And I grew up, and a lot of people might have a hard time realizing this now, but I came into my heyday as a sports fan during a time when the New York Knicks were actually a really good basketball team. I know it's hard for people to realize
I remember
now,
that
the 1990s were a great era.
Yeah.
And you had the best of the best broadcasting the games. You had Marv Albert, you had John Andres, you had Mike Breen starting to get his career going. I mean, you had the best of the best. So these are the guys that I listened to growing up. And I was the kid who, every time you went to a basketball game or a baseball game, I had the scorecard out. I would watch the Knicks games at home. I'd have the scorecard, keeping score of the basketball games even at home. My friends thought I was crazy for doing that. I turned down the volume on the TV and practiced my play-by-play. I mean, I was doing it from about the age of 8 all the way until I got to college when I actually got to do it for the first time for a radio station that people listen to.
And you were never a Yankees fan, were you?
I was a Yankees fan. That's why people ask me all the time, who do you root for? I don't like telling people that I root for teams because I cover all the teams. I cover the Yankees,
right.
I cover the Mets,
I root for
cover
sports.
baseball. I always say I grew up a Yankees fan, which is absolutely true, but I'm not sitting there at the games with my Derek Jeter jersey on anymore.
I know.
It's not a good look if I have to cover the Mets also.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. You have to do it all.
Yeah.
So when did it all begin? When was your first real opportunity to do what you loved best?
Interestingly, my first real opportunity, I was about 9 or 10 years old, and Yankee Stadium used to have this booth. It was sponsored by Budweiser. It was called the Budweiser Play-by-Play.
Wow.
And you could go and you bought an inning, and you sat in the booth, and they taped you, and they gave you a headset. You and your partner, who was my brother, who was 3 years younger than me. So we threw the headset on. We were actually in Yankee Stadium broadcasting a full inning of a game. I did the play-by-play. My brother, who was 3 years younger and not as into it as I was my color commentator and added some interesting commentary to the game. But it's funny because you look back on the tape now, my brother, who's probably 7, is just kind of goofing off, happy to be there. And I'm serious. I'm like locked in on the game. And if he's fooling around, I'm like, hey, come on, this is serious business here. So.
This isn't a game. This is serious.
This is serious. This is my life, and 30 years later, it still is.
You know, it's amazing to watch a game from the box. I told you when we talked earlier, one of my best friends was Roy Campanella, and Roy and I went to a lot of games together. And in 1977, when the Dodgers played the Yankees in the World Series, we were there in what Roy calls Steinbrenner's booth. Mm-hmm. And we were there, and DiMaggio was in the next booth, and the game was right there, and it was like, this game is being played for me.
I know, it's such a
that's what it feels like. It feels like it's yours, you know. And then at the end, when the Yankees won, and people poured in all over the sides, and I was there to watch this whole thing, and it was amazing. It's theater. So that's what it must be for you. Is it like theater for you?
You know, I had a similar experience. Derek Jeter's final game, 2014.
Oh, wow.
You probably remember the play. You know, the end of his career, we knew it was his last game at Yankee Stadium. The Yankees weren't going to the playoffs that season. They were playing against the Baltimore Orioles. Wow. All of a sudden, Jeter comes up in a tie game with the potential winning run on second base. First pitch, typical Jeterian base hit to right field. And I had the perspective from the press box of watching this whole thing unfold. So I see the ball go through between first and second base. I see the runner take off from second. As I see the ball in right field, I see the runner rounding third. And then you can kind of just like see this whole thing come together. Play at the plate, he's safe. Jeter rounds first. He jumps up in the air. Everybody out of the dugout mobs him. I mean, it's one of the most vivid images I have in my mind. And I had that same perspective that you described from the press box, watching the entire field. And I even kind of have some goosebumps talking about it now. It was so exciting.
Oh, it has to be.
Yeah.
You know, that's, I think, the most amazing thing about sportscasting is that you don't know the show.
Yeah.
It happens as it happens. So you don't know what's going to happen next. And you have to be ready at any moment, you know, to do your big, holy cow.
Yeah.
You know?
Everything's different.
You know, everything's
Every
different.
day at the office is different.
Anything could happen. Yeah, that's what's exciting. I mean, that's what I like about this. You know, I bring guests on. I never prepare the actual show. We have no scripts, because it's more exciting just to hear what's going to come next. You know, you never know what's going to come out of the guest's mouth. You never know what's going to happen with the players out there. Anything could happen at any time.
I'll tell you a quick story about that.
Oh,
and I mentioned this in the talk that I gave you when I met you last month.
Yep.
One of the most exciting sporting events I've ever covered. And I've gotten to cover a lot. I covered the Super Bowl when it was in New Jersey, the World Series a couple of times when the Yankees and Mets have been there, Stanley Cup Finals, NCAA tournaments. Still to this day, probably the most exciting sporting event I've ever covered was the annual Turkey Bowl game. Now, you're an old football coach, so you're familiar with the high school football rivalries on Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah.
We have two really good ones in New York City. You have Xavier against Fordham Prep. They've played for more than 90 years. Yeah. And then you also have Mount St. Michael against Cardinal Hayes. Oh. So in 2008, I showed up to cover the game. It was at Mount St. Michael. And at the time, Mount had won 28 consecutive games in the rivalry. So we all showed up. We're like, okay, this is a nice tradition, but it's really it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Mount's going to win again. Maybe Cardinal Hayes can put up a good fight. Well, anyway, we get there, and Cardinal Hayes looks like they have a little bounce in their step. So it's a close game, and they're actually winning after the first quarter. Then they go into halftime, and they're still winning. You're like, wow, this is interesting. This is at least going to be a good finish this year. You're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then Mount St. Michael comes out of halftime, marches down the field to pull within, I think, 4 points. On the ensuing kickoff, the Hayes kid drops the ball, and everyone's like, oh, my God, now Mount's going to recover. He picks it up, and he runs it back for a touchdown. So now Hayes has its 11-point lead back, and Mount never got back into the game.
Wow.
So as the clock is ticking in the fourth quarter, you start to realize, holy cow, these kids who none of us expected this to happen today. These kids are going to break a losing streak that has lasted 28 years.
Wow.
And the last 4 or 5 minutes, because it didn't go down to the final play, I think it was a 10 or 11-point game. The last 4 or 5 minutes were kind of like a celebration, a party. There were alumni, there were students, there were parents all on the Cardinal Hayes sideline, just like letting out so much emotion. The head coach of Cardinal Hayes, who ironically had played for Mount St. Michael, a fellow by the name of C.J. O'Neill, he was crying on the field. I mean, it was still a very emotional thing to cover, just to see sports at that level. I mean, this isn't the highest level, this isn't the professional level, but you could see how much it meant to everybody who was involved in that game.
Wow. Any one particular sport, or you cover any sport?
I cover any sport. That's the beauty of News 12. Like you said, you never know.
You never know what you're going to do. No 2 days are the same.
And so often the best stories that we get are from the sports that aren't that high profile.
Yeah.
Just like interesting human interest type stories that we get the opportunity to tell and to share about people who live in our city.
Now, is this what you thought it was going to be when you were a kid?
I had no idea. All I knew is I wanted to work in sports. And when I was growing up, newspapers were still king.
Yeah.
I went to high school in Manhattan. I took the 4 train to school every day, and I read the New York Post every day from back to front. I usually get to the front. But that was all I wanted to do at that time, was be the beat writer for the New York Knicks for the New York Post. But then I got to college. I started to write for the school newspaper. But then right around that time, now we're talking 2001, 2002, 2003, that's when the internet started to take shape of what we now know it to be.
Things began to change.
And obviously the value of newspapers, not the value, but the prestige of newspapers started to decline. So the job basically changed from there. I had a wonderful opportunity my senior year in college. I graduated from SUNY Brockport, which is in between Rochester and Buffalo, New York. I had a wonderful opportunity to intern at the local CBS affiliate in Rochester. I had a great internship coordinator who was the sports director there, a fellow by the name of John Kutchko, and it was the first time that I ever got to see the inner workings of a TV newsroom. And I fell in love with it within 3 days of being here. I said, this is what I want to do. I mean, we were always on the go. Any level of sports. We covered the Buffalo Bills hardcore, the Buffalo Sabres, Syracuse University. That was actually the year that they won the national championship with Carmelo Anthony. And the high school sports and the local college sports. And everything, like you said, every day was different. It was a different story.
New and
it was
exciting
a different
and
script.
different.
And every day was cool. And I knew right there, I'm like, this is what I want to do.
Now, you obviously don't work every day.
I do work every day.
You do work every day? Oh, wow. I mean, but it's like...
This time of year I work every day, yeah.
But do they give you a schedule? Like, today you're going here and tomorrow you're going here?
Well, as a sports director, I kind of get to make that schedule. And I have a wonderful staff, a couple of other reporters who work with me. And it's the kind of job where even when you're not in the office, you're not ever really off the clock. So there's constant communication. They have passions of stories they want to cover. I have passions of stories I want to cover. And that's how we piece together our coverage.
So you actually go to games and do the games.
Yeah.
And you do now when you do your TV shows, you do it about the games, or do you actually air the?
We don't air the games themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
Our coverage is a mixture. If it's a big game, we'll show highlights of that game. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had the PSAL football championship that they play at Yankee Stadium every year, which is great for those kids. Erasmus Hall from Brooklyn beat Tottenville from Staten Island 27-0. So we showed highlights of that game. We did the interviews on the field after that game. today, for example, the day that we're taping this, is National Signing Day, which is a really special day when you cover local sports. Basically, it's the day that all high school athletes are allowed to sign scholarships to college.
Wow.
So we're going to go to a handful of different schools. We're going to interview the kids about their college choice, and it's a cool day because it's an emotional day. The kids are excited. They know where they're going to college. The parents are excited because they don't have to pay for college because their kids are getting full scholarships. So that's one of the more fun days in the calendar for us.
You know, I grew up in Utica, New York, so going to Yankee Stadium was almost unheard of. And I tell you, when I was with Roy, one day we went to an old timers game, and I wheeled his chair. You remember he was paralyzed, and I wheeled his chair out, and there I was on the field, and all these people were there, and and they were all paying attention to the players, and I kind of sidestepped my way over to home plate, and I stood on home plate and looked up at all these people and all these faces, and I said, "Oh my God. What an experience." And I imagine what it had to be, for some of these guys, like you, who are in the middle of these games. You are part of the action. You're part of the game. When we're listening to you, talk about these games and talk about play-by-plays, you are part of the game. You're a player in that game, which is really amazing. And I can understand your passion for it, to understand that you are part of it. When those people are listening and they're watching that game, they're listening to you and they're watching them, and it's all one big picture.
That was a wonderful experience. I had a similar experience to what you described. Not quite home plate at Yankee Stadium, but a couple of years ago I had the opportunity to start hosting the Knicks pregame show on ESPN Radio in New York. And it was my first game at Madison Square Garden. It was 2015. I remember they were playing the Lakers. So the pregame show, it's 30 minutes before the game. So when I go on air, and I'm locked in. This was probably my second game doing it for them. It was my first one at Madison Square Garden. I'm not really paying attention to what's around me, and I'm locked in. And also, when the pregame show starts, the Garden's pretty empty because the game's not starting for another 30 minutes. Well, anyway, I get to the show, I finish the pregame show, I take my headset off, and I turn around, I look around, like in front of me, to the side of me, behind me, and now the Garden's filled. They're ready for game time, and I'm just like, oh my God! Oh my, seriously,
I'm here.
Growing up in New York City, Knicks fan in Madison Square Garden. It hit me.
Yankee Stadium, the first time I went to a Yankee game, I was already teaching. When I was in Utica, I didn't have the opportunity. We didn't have a lot of money. We weren't going to travel all the way to New York City for a game. And when I walked in and I saw that turf and everything was so green, and it was like, what a totally different feeling from watching it on TV. It's like being there.
Yeah.
That's, I imagine, what the most amazing part of your job. It's being there. Whether it's at a high school game or a pro game, you're there. You're part of this whole thing. And there's kind of an aura and an excitement that's around a sports game of any kind. So I envy you. It's really an amazing thing. So talk to me, what now? What now? Are you going to do this for the next 20 years?
This is sure. This is. I better. I got two kids.
Of your mountain.
So yeah, no.
I hear you.
This is it. This is all I've ever wanted to do.
Your kids into sports?
Oh, it's funny. They just got into it. I have an 8-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. My daughter's a really good athlete. She's a terrific swimmer. My son just started coming into his own. We put him in flag football this year.
How old is he?
He's 6 years old.
Oh, 6.
So
right.
it was very similar to me. When I was 5 years old, I couldn't give a darn about the Yankees. My dad would be watching the Yankee game at home when I was 5, and I would want to watch Fraggle Rock. And then 6 o'clock, and now not 6, excuse me, 6 years old, and all of a sudden every morning I'm waking up to the Yankees win last night. The same exact thing happened with him, which is really funny. So he's into it now.
One of the things I told you, I was a wrestling coach, and my grandson, my grandchildren, and my daughter moved up to Glens Falls, New York. And wrestling, those kids up there start at 5 years old. They're out there on those mats. They have little tournaments with them. That's when to get them. And to take that sport and to do it, and you instill it in the child, the whole idea of competition and the idea of respecting sports. and I don't mean a kid has to live in front of a TV set, especially this day and age. There's so many things that occupy a kid's mind. I would rather see a kid at a ball game than in front of a computer game. But it's a new world. Do you see the world changing? I mean, is sports what it was when you were a kid?
No. It's a little more serious. People take it more seriously. I think there's more in people's minds. I think there's more at stake. There's more. I remember playing baseball for the first time when I was 6.
Wow.
Now it's almost like, as a parent, I look at it. If your son or daughter isn't starting until they're 6, they're a year or two behind the 8 ball. And I remember when I was 6, I was one of the youngest in the league. People do take it. I get to see all sides of sports. I mean, the best part of my job is a lot of the stuff that we get to cover ends up being the best moment in a lot of people's lives.
Were there any kids that made you say, "Oh my God, this kid is going to be"? I mean, do you see those stars growing?
Oh, sure, especially in New York City. I mean, we have so many great athletes in New York City. I remember about 6 years ago, the same PSAL championship that I was just mentioning that happened last month, or a couple weeks ago at Yankee Stadium. 6 years ago, the same school, Erasmus Hall High School, was playing in the championship that year, and they had this sophomore running back named Curtis Samuel, who you could just tell was 10 times better than
bound for the pros.
Anyone on the field. And sure enough, Curtis Samuel went on to have a standout career at Ohio State University, and now he's a wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. And you could tell, I mean, people like that, when they're 14, 15 years old and they're that talented, they jump off the page at an early age.
You see them right away, you look and go, there's a star.
Yeah, and you're not surprised when you see them become what they become. And that's fun, too. One of the biggest stars in the NBA, Kemba Walker, now of the Boston Celtics. And he grew up in the Bronx. He actually grew up right across the street from our studio at News 12 The Bronx. And I've known him since he was a junior at Rice High School. I followed him through his career at the University of Connecticut, NBA All-Star with the Charlotte Hornets, and now with the Boston Celtics. And it's fun because I have memories of this kid as a young 16-year-old, respectful, calling me Mr. O'Keefe, nice to meet you, the whole thing. And now he's a point guard for the Boston Celtics, somebody who millions of people grow up admiring.
Still call you Mr. O'Keefe.
He might. Yeah.
Now, I remember when you did your talk, you mentioned in your career that you had kind of a couple lucky breaks. What were those lucky breaks? Where you apply for something, you go, oh my God, I got it.
Yeah. Well, you need them. Well, so I'll take you. I had an interesting path, and it's not that uncommon if you want to make it in this business. It's the type of business where there are opportunities all over the country.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and I was taught this in college. I had a great mentor named Warren Kazareski. He ran our radio station at SUNY Brockport. And he told me that if you really want to do this for a living, you need to be willing to go anywhere after you graduate. And I was. I had no qualms about it. I was already in Brockport, New York. That's 6 hours from home.
And so you ended up?
I went out and I sent out samples of my work all over the country. Newspaper samples to papers, play-by-play samples to radio stations, TV samples to TV stations. And I got an opportunity to be a play-by-play broadcaster for Rocky Mountain College. It's an NAIA school in Billings, Montana. So I loaded up my Jeep. My dad and I drove across the country. We stopped at a couple of ball games along the way, which you would appreciate. We hit Fenway Park, we hit Wrigley Field, we hit the Metrodome in Minnesota. Went out to Billings, Montana, and it was not a big deal. It was going to be a 7-month commitment. Yep. I was going to do their football games on the radio, their basketball games on the radio. I would get a lot of experience and then see where it takes me. Well, right before I was set to move back home to New York, I had gotten involved in a noon basketball game at that college every day. And I didn't have a TV. I mean, this is,
wow.
I know. I didn't have a TV. So it turns out this one guy I was playing basketball with every day was the assistant news director at the NBC station in Billings. Wow. I had no idea what he did. I just knew him as a guy who liked to shoot the ball a lot and not pass it that much. So we get to talking at the water fountain one day. He asked me what I do, and I told him and my plans, and he goes, we might have a job opening for a cameraman. I said, really? Because I was dying to get into TV. He goes, do you have any experience as a cameraman? I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I had none. I had none. But I'm like, I'll figure it out. I gave the classic line, yeah, I know how to do it, but it's been a while, so I might need a refresher course, which is code for I've never actually done it, so somebody's going to need to give me a crash course. But anyway, I got hired as a news photographer for the local NBC affiliate, and I was out shooting fires and car accidents and
Hey, Andy and Todd, don't get any ideas. I need you at the cameras.
and that was my first foray into television. And I would pester them. I'd be like, listen, I really want to be on air. I really want to do sports. I really want to be in front of the camera. And they would give me, finally, after months of proving myself and badgering them enough, they would give me an opportunity to start doing some feature stories myself in front of the camera, and that was my first big break.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I got some bad news for you, Pat O'Keefe. We've got about a minute and a half. Defining moments in your life.
Okay, a couple. First time I was ever on television, it was a live shot in Billings, Montana.
Wow.
It was such a rush. I couldn't sleep the night before. I knew I was going to have the opportunity to do it. I really appreciate the producer who allowed me to do it. Her name was Melissa Jensen. She knew I worked hard. She knew I really wanted it, and she said, it was the type of story. It didn't need a live shot, but she appreciated the hard work I did, so she allowed me to go on air for the first time to get that experience. That was kind of the first moment. The second moment was 2007. American League Division Series, Yankees against the Indians.
Wow.
In the locker room at Yankee Stadium. All of a sudden, at Alex Rodriguez's locker, I'm like,
Oh, wow.
how did I get here? Like 2 days ago, I was up there, yelling at him for not coming through in the clutch, and now I'm standing at his locker with a camera. Those were two wow moments for me.
Yeah, big moments. Shout outs. You've made some shout outs. Anybody you forget?
My parents. My dad, Frank, my mom, Mary, my wife, Megan.
We're not even going to mention the fact that your dad is sitting out there.
Yeah. I'm surprised he hasn't crashed the set yet because he's been.
Well, Andy's holding him.
He's
down.
not allergic to a camera, I'll tell you that. But no, look, they always knew that this was my passion, and they've supported me tremendously.
And I interrupted you. You mentioned your wife and kids.
Yeah, my wife Megan, she appreciated my passion too, and she helped me dress a lot better, which has helped also. And then of course my wonderful children, Bryn and James.
Wonderful. And young and ready to go. You think your kids will follow your footsteps?
I don't know. We'll see. Whatever they want to do.
You have a boy and a girl, you
Yes,
said.
yes.
Yeah. World's changing for women, and hopefully we'll see some pro-women. I'd like to see a little more equality here.
Yeah.
So hopefully she'll grow up to be a sportscaster as well and get out there and do it. I can't thank you enough for
This was
being
fun.
here.
This went fast.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
It flies by.
It does.
You're great at what you do. Keep doing what you do. You help to make sports as exciting as it is.
Well, thank you. I love it.
Well,
thank you.
So do I, and I love your being here. Thank you for sharing this show with us. Thank you for being one-on-one with Pat O'Keefe. A pleasure, sir.
Thanks.
Yep,
Vin.
thank you.